There are bodies of water that remember longer than any living thing. They keep seasons like pages in a book, folding winters into springs, losing only the names of who once stood on their banks. In the northern country, where the pines crowd the sky and fog moves like slow breath between trunks, there is a lake whose surface never quite lets the world be still. Locals call it Vetra's mirror, not because it reflects what is there, but because it reflects what is lost, what is waiting to be found, what has been forgotten and cannot quite leave the water behind. Stories gather around places like this. An old woman will tell one version, soft and bitter, of a wedding that ended at the water's edge. Men who used to fish its shallows tell another, a night when lanterns went out at once and no boat ever returned. Children whisper the name as if it were a dare. Anthropologists wrote about it in stiff journals. An anomalous acoustic phenomenon. Travelers note the map coordinates. None explain why. When the moon thins to a silver blade and the forest ceases its gossip, a voice rises from the lake, clear as a bell and sad as midnight. Arlen arrived in late October, on a day when the world seemed to lean inward. He had taken a job that required leaving the city for a time. Research, archival work, cataloging scraps of folklore. But that was only the story he told himself. What he truly sought was a place quiet enough that his own thoughts might be heard, the kind of silence made by absence rather than a lack of noise. The notion of a singing lake appealed to that private wish. It suggested that the world still had mysteries that did not belong to the marketplace. The train dropped him at a station that looked unchanged since long before his grandfather's birth. From there, he walked. The road slipped into woodland, and the land leaned colder. He crossed one last fenced pasture, where a single crow watched his passage from a moss-encrusted post, and then the trees swallowed the path. The forest moved according to its own calendar. Moss had thickened over stiles, and roots raised the earth into irregular ribs. The air smelled of stone, pine, and something older, the scent of water kept in shadow. He saw the first hint of the lake at dusk, not its body, but the peculiar way light flattened in that direction, as if the sky were sharing a secret with water. When he pushed through the last row of birches, the scene opened. Vetra's mirror lay still and black, wider than he had imagined, its surface unbroken. The trees around it bowed down like a congregation. For a moment, he only stood and felt the solitude as though it were a physical thing settling at his shoulders. Night was coming on like cloth. The first sound didn't arrive all at once. It threaded itself through the hush in the form of a tone, then another, so faint he might have dismissed it as his imagination had he not noticed the way his chest answered it. It was neither wholly made of air nor of wind. It seemed to come from beneath the world, as if the lake had a throat. A melody rose and fell in no human language he could recognize. It moved like water, folding into itself, carrying a kind of sorrow along with it that did not belong to any particular age. It tugged at something he felt but could not name. A hollow in memory, perhaps, an old grief for a time in which things were simpler or more honest. He stepped closer than he had intended. The cold bit through his boots and the reeds brushed his knees. The song increased as if noticing him. He realized then that it was not a single voice, but layered tones, a chorus thin as mist, a low harmonic beneath them that made something in his ribs hum. In the near light of his headlamp, the surface remained glass black. He peered into it, and for a dizzy second believed he saw motion under the black skin, a pale shape drifting, slow as a thought. After that first night, nothing simple happened. He pitched a tent near where the shoreline bent toward a stand of alders. He kept a journal, because a journal makes proof out of thin things. Also, writing steadied him. He cataloged temperature, wind, and his own breathing. He drew small sketches of ripples, circular, concentric, impossible to trace to any wind's finger. He noted fishermen's huts on older maps, the skeleton of a jetty swallowed by reeds, and a plaque in the village library whose words had been scoured by rain, "Memorial to the Lost." But the lake refused the tidy. Daylight made it indifferent. The surface became a sheet of ink, holding back reflection so precisely that sky and tree looked like a painting pressed to its face. Yet when he leaned close, the mirror returned not a faithful image, but an altered one. Branches bent where they should not. Where the shore should have been empty, he thought he glimpsed for an instant the dark outline of a figure standing knee-deep, as if the water had a shallow interior where human shapes could linger. Once, as a gull wheeled and cried somewhere he could not see, the image of a child's small hand appeared at the margin of the reflection, and then, just as fast, cleanly vanished with that small, cruel precision that makes a man doubt his senses. The locals spoke of it when they spoke at all. The lake reminds, the lake takes, the lake keeps. A woman at the inn said it simply, "We don't live close, not anymore." She folded her hands around a cup like a talisman. "It sings when the dead forget to be dead. You hear it, and it remembers you back." Her eyes were still young, her hands older than her face. He wanted to ask what she meant, but that too was a wordless thing left unnamed by the region. The lake keeps company with wrongs and with secrets, and it does not always return what it borrows in familiar form. That night the song came again, clearer than before. He had the odd sensation of being addressed by a voice both intimate and remote, like a letter written in a stranger's handwriting but signed with someone you once loved. He tried to describe it in his journal, but words buckled. A low refrain, like a lullaby for stones, notes that bend into themselves, a harmony that smelled of salt and soot. He drew wobbly staff lines and left them with empty bars. Sleep was a thin thing. He dreamed of the lake opening like a mouth and of faces surfacing one by one, not angry, but patient, like prisoners released into the wrong weather. He woke with wet hair, though it had not rained. Once, in a sleepy stupor, he thought he heard words spelled with water, "Remember me." Whether his ears supplied those consonants, or whether the lake had finally risked direct speech, he could not be sure. The morning light changed the rules. Day made the water less brave, yet it also exposed details, a scattering of shells along the shoreline that glowed faintly in sunlight, and the crooked posts of the old jetty breaking the mirror like a jagged incision. He walked the perimeter again and found impressions in the mud, small, human-sized, and arranged as if someone had stood there and then stepped deliberately into the water. The prints led to the edge and stopped, as if the lake itself had swallowed steps. He lifted his boot from the wet clay and left the imprint of his own soul beside them, a useless echo. In the days that followed, routine stitched itself around the mystery. He rose with the dawn, boiled water, fed a meager fire, and then spent hours scanning the black surface for change. Sometimes nothing happened but the slow drift of cloud shadows. Sometimes the wind conspired with no one, and small rings appeared on the lake's face and then spread outward in perfect circles until they touched the cattails and vanished. He walked and made notes. He read the single crumb of local history he could find in the rotting municipal ledger. He left polite inquiries at the only inn, and the innkeeper answered with more warning than explanation. A week into his stay, a girl from the next village arrived with a lantern and an expression like a person who has come to pay a debt. She did not knock at his tent. She simply stood there at the edge of his camp and regarded him as if considering a map. "You're here for the song," she said without preface. Her voice was small but steady. He nodded. People do not usually come to talk at the edge of such things. They come to be closer to a memory. "Do you hear anything else?" she asked. "Do you see them?" She used plural, as if the presence had plenty of company. He told her about the face in the reflection and the prints in the mud. She listened, as if cataloging symptoms, and then pointed toward the opposite shore. "When I was small, we would listen for it," she said. "My mother said not to stare into the mirror for long. She said, if you stare enough, the water will memorize you. And if it memorizes you, it might want to keep that memory." She smiled once, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Then she crouched and touched the mud where the prints ended. "They show sometimes, not always. Sometimes the lake is hungry for a story." "I'm not hungry," Arlen replied quickly, and he did not mean the words about food. He meant he was not ready for the lake to write him into one of its remembered pages. She shrugged once and stood. "It doesn't ask you if you're ready. It only notices." Without more, she left, taking her lantern back into the forest in a way that suggested she did not want to be followed. That night, the song was patient. It slowed and elongated syllables until they sounded like the opening of an old, patient hymn. The melody wove into his chest and lodged there. He could feel the shape of a phrase long after the note faded. Somewhere beneath the lake, something moved with the deliberate grace of a swimmer learning a hymn. Once, while the melody trembled, the surface of the water blushed a faint, pale blue as if a distant underwater lantern had been lit. He could not keep away. Each night he sat closer to the shore, and each night he felt the tide of attention, as if a mind under the water was dividing itself into curiosity and caution, slowly deciding what part of him it would remember. The lake would teach him to listen carefully. He would learn that some sounds are maps and some maps are traps. Toward the end of the second week, he woke before dawn with the sense of being watched by something that could see without opening its eyes. The air was still, and the surface of Vetra's mirror lay like a black cloth. He walked to the water, and the song answered immediately, soft and close, like breath. Then, for the first time, the water shifted in a way that was not merely ripple, but intention. A pattern unfolded beneath the skin, concentric grooves like the growth rings of a tree, and as they moved, they carried with them an image so subtle he might have imagined it, the hint of a woman's profile, hair floating around her like dark thread. She did not surface. She hovered just out of reach, as if proving existence without offering touch. Arlen held his ground. He felt a strange loyalty to the place, a feeling compounded of pity and something like resolve. He realized with a small, painful clarity that he had come here not only to hear the song, but to answer it. The lake had humored him. It had shown him a fragment of itself and expected him to recognize the comment as an invitation. Whether that invitation would become conversation or consumption, he could not yet tell. Far across the water, the forest shifted, and a single star slipped behind cloud. The song receded into a low, humming hush that remained even when he turned away. He carried that hush like a pebble in his pocket of thoughts, heavy and cold. He unrolled his journal and wrote in careful, deliberate lines. Vetra's mirror listens differently than people. It keeps, it sings, it remembers images that are not ours and shows them to us as if they were favors. I came looking for silence and found an answer that asks for return. He closed the notebook. The lake watched him doing so, and the watching felt older than any man's life. It was not simply curiosity. It was an economy of attention, an exchange that had been going on longer than any ledger could hold. That night, just before the fog swallowed the shore, the melody rose once more. It folded into a phrase that this time landed with a clarity he could not deny. A small, separate sound, like a single voice answering, though whether the voice belonged to the lake or to something within the lake, he did not know. He listened as the note trembled into silence, and in the silence he understood that his arrival had already become part of the song. The lake had begun to remember him. In the morning, Arlen rose to a silence so complete it made his ears ache. The fog had thickened overnight, rolling down from the northern ridges in a slow, pale tide. It hovered above the lake like a second surface, a mirror atop a mirror. For a while he simply watched, noting how the world dissolved as the mist thickened. Even the treetops, usually his landmarks, had been erased. He could have been standing at the edge of nowhere. He boiled water for tea, though the fire refused to burn properly. The wood hissed and spat, damp from the night's condensation. Every sound seemed trapped within a small circle around him, unable to travel far. He thought of how the locals described the lake, a thing that listens. What if it did not simply listen, but also swallowed? Sound, warmth, memory, everything that came too close might eventually belong to it. When the mist finally thinned, Arlen decided to visit the village again. He needed supplies, and he wanted, though he barely admitted it, to speak to someone human, if only to hear another voice answer him. The path wound through birch and pine, past stones carved with half-lost initials. He noticed now that the forest carried strange geometries. Certain trees leaned toward the lake as if drawn by invisible current. Moss grew thicker on the side facing the water, like a soft audience listening to its song. The village of Vatka was smaller than he remembered. Perhaps it had always been so. A single street of wooden houses, shutters closed though it was morning, a square with a boarded-up fountain, and a chapel whose bell had not rung in years. An old man was sitting outside the shop, whittling a piece of birch into the shape of a bird. He watched Arlen approach with mild curiosity. "You're staying by the lake," the old man said, not as a question. "I am. I'm writing about it." The knife paused against the wood. "Writing what?" "Notes, observations, maybe a study." The man chuckled. "You study that lake, it will study you back. Always does." Arlen smiled faintly, pretending not to hear the seriousness under the jest. "Do you know much about it?" "Too much, maybe. Too little, certainly." The man looked past him toward the tree line. "We used to fish there, my father too. Then one winter the ice sank, like glass breaking underfoot, but softer. After that the nets came up empty. The song scared the fish, they said. I think it just took them." "It took them," Arlen repeated. The man nodded. "That's what it does. Takes what's near, keeps it quiet." He looked at Arlen again, this time with a kind of pity. "You hear the voice yet?" Arlen hesitated. "Something, at night." "Then it's already listening." The conversation faltered there. The man turned back to his carving, and Arlen moved on, buying what he needed from the small shop: bread, candles, a packet of coarse salt, before walking to the library. It wasn't much of a building, more a converted parsonage with books stacked where sermons used to be. Inside it smelled of dust and damp paper, an odor he found oddly comforting. The librarian was a thin woman with silver hair coiled tight against her neck. Her eyes, pale green, seemed to look through things rather than at them. "Research?" she asked when he explained his interest. "Yes, old records, local folklore, anything on Vetra's mirror." She pursed her lips. "Not much is written, but we keep the parish logs. They mention drownings, missing persons. People say the lake calls them." "Calls them?" "Like a name being spoken. Sometimes in dreams, sometimes while awake. Some go willingly. Others just walk." She gestured to a locked cabinet behind her desk. "There's a ledger from 1894. Before that, it's oral tradition." He copied the entries into his notebook. 12th of March, 1894. Elena Mirova, age 23, vanished near Northern Bank. Witnesses claim voice from water heard prior. 5 September 1901. Two brothers, fishermen, failed to return. Nets recovered tangled. No sign of bodies. 21 November 1922. Father Anton reported hearing hymn-like melody during Mass. Parishioners uneasy. 14th June 1947. Evacuation order following acoustic anomaly military test. Locals relocated temporarily, and so it continued, a century of vanishings, scattered like drops of ink through time. He noticed that the gaps between incidents were never more than 20 years. The same pattern persisted. The younger, the more restless, the more likely to hear the song. He asked about photographs. The librarian hesitated, then fetched a small box from the cabinet. Inside were a few faded images. Fishermen by the shore, a wedding group, children holding lanterns. One photograph caught his attention. A woman standing ankle-deep in the lake, her face turned away, her hair unbound. Something about her posture, calm yet listening, made him feel she wasn't posing, but responding. On the back of the photo, written in elegant Cyrillic script, was a single word, Elena. He copied it down, then thanked the librarian. As he turned to leave, she said quietly, "If you hear her singing, don't answer." Outside, the clouds had thickened. He walked back to camp through a drizzle that blurred the horizon. The trees seemed closer now, the forest denser. At the shoreline, the lake looked the same, too calm, too deliberate in its stillness. He imagined the photograph again, the woman half-turned, listening. Elena Mirova. He wondered whether the song had always belonged to her, or whether she had simply joined it. That night, the music began earlier than usual. The tone was softer, more melodic, weaving through the reeds like smoke. Arlen sat by the shore, recorder in hand. He wanted proof, not only for his work, but to assure himself he wasn't losing his grasp on the ordinary. He pressed record. The tape hissed. Then the first note came, a low hum, layered, organic, yet impossible to pinpoint. It rose and fell in complex intervals, like speech slowed down and stretched thin. He listened through headphones, heart steadying against the rhythm. At first, it was only sound, but then, under it, a shape, words. Not in English, nor any language he recognized, but carrying cadence, emotion, intent. He wrote phonetically in his notebook, Vetra, Manai, Sora. He didn't know why the syllables unsettled him so deeply, but he knew enough folklore to recognize the power of names. To name is to know is to be known. At some point, he must have fallen asleep because when he woke, the recorder was off and the fire dead. The lake reflected the first hint of dawn, gray and infinite. He replayed the tape. At first, only wind and static. Then, faintly, a whisper, a woman's voice, near to the microphone though he had been alone. One word, clear this time. Remember. He shut the recorder off. For a long moment, he could only listen to his own breathing. The air was colder. The reeds did not move, though there was wind. A small part of him wanted to pack up, to leave before the pattern deepened, but another part, the stronger part, felt he had touched the edge of something real, something worth the fear. He spent the next days trying to decode the tape. The word repeated itself at intervals, sometimes overlapping with others he couldn't parse. He layered frequencies, slowed playback, filtered noise. The voice always returned. Once, at half speed, it almost sounded like two voices, one higher, one lower, harmonizing like a lament. The pattern wasn't random. It followed the rhythm of breathing. By the end of the week, Arlen's reflection had begun to betray him. When he leaned over the water, his face appeared delayed, as if the mirror were thinking before answering. Sometimes it smiled faintly after he had stopped smiling. Once, late at night, he saw himself blink when he hadn't. That moment shook him, though he tried to rationalize it as fatigue. The next morning, he avoided the lake until the sun was high, but the lake was patient. Its voice carried on the wind even at noon. He heard it faintly while cutting wood, while writing, while trying to read. Always the same cadence. 3 beats, a pause, a long note. Once he caught himself humming it back unconsciously, before realizing what he was doing. He stopped immediately, but something inside him knew the lake had noticed. A storm arrived 2 nights later. The wind pressed against the tent, and thunder rolled across the valley. The lake, however, remained still. He stepped outside, expecting to see waves, but instead the surface gleamed black and undisturbed. Only lightning gave it texture, illuminating a shifting pattern beneath. Slow-moving light, circular, concentric, as though something large turned in sleep. He shouted, as if to test his own sanity. The storm swallowed his voice. The lake did not answer. Yet even through the thunder, he thought he heard the song, steady, unbroken, immune to weather. When the flash came again, he saw for the first time the shape of a woman standing in the shallows, not walking, not waiting, simply there. Her dress trailed like smoke. Her face was turned toward him, though the features blurred. For a heartbeat, he thought she smiled. Then the next bolt of lightning came, and she was gone. He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the fire until dawn, eyes fixed on the lake. Every instinct told him to run, to abandon the camp, to never return. But the mind does not easily retreat from wonder. Fear and fascination are kin. They share the same root. By morning, the storm had passed. The lake glistened as if nothing had happened. He went down to the edge and found something waiting where the water met the mud. A small silver pendant shaped like a feather, tarnished by time. He picked it up carefully. The clasp was broken. It looked old, older than the village, older than any human memory might account for. He turned it over and saw, scratched faintly on the back, a single word, Elena. He stood there, holding it, feeling the damp metal warm slowly in his palm. When the wind moved across the surface, it carried with it a phrase half-sung, half-breathed, Vetra, Manai, the same syllables from the recording. He understood then that the song wasn't merely a sound. It was a call, and calls demand response. The question wasn't whether he would answer. It was how long he could resist. That evening, as dusk swallowed the treetops, he set the pendant on a stone by the water. He didn't know whether it was an offering or a plea. The lake accepted it silently. And when night came, the song began again. Softer now, intimate, the way one might speak to a friend. The morning began in silence, a silence so dense it felt as though the world itself had stopped breathing. The mist was everywhere, thick, unbroken, a pale ocean of fog that erased all shape and distance. The lake lay hidden beneath it, a secret wrapped in cloud. Even the birds were quiet, Only the faintest ripple of water against stone gave proof that the world still moved. Mikhail stepped carefully down the slope toward the shore. Each footfall sank into damp earth, and every step released the scent of wet leaves and mud. His coat clung to him with the weight of the morning's chill. For a moment, he thought he saw his breath rise in front of him, curling into the white, and then disappearing, like everything else. He had not slept. The voice from the lake still haunted him. It had followed him through the night, weaving itself into his dreams, soft as the sound of wind passing through a hollow shell. It didn't frighten him anymore. Instead, it made him restless, like a forgotten melody that refused to end. The fog swirled as he reached the edge of the water. There was no horizon, only the dull gleam of mist and the shifting silver of the lake. The air tasted faintly of iron, cold and sharp. Somewhere beneath that still surface, something moved. He crouched, dipping his fingers into the water. It was icy, but not unbearable. When he drew his hand back, the droplets on his skin glimmered faintly, as if catching light from an unseen source. The lake had always been strange, older than the village itself. The elders said it had no bottom, that it connected to an underground sea, or perhaps another world. They said that, long ago, when the valley was still a forest, the moon fell into the earth and melted, and the lake was what remained of its silver. No one truly believed these stories, but no one dared to mock them either. Mikhail stood there, watching his reflection shift in the rippling surface. His face looked unfamiliar, paler, more hollowed by the sleepless night. He looked like a man fading from the world. Then he heard it again, a faint hum rising from the depths. At first, he thought it was the wind moving through the reeds, but there was rhythm to it, something deliberate and slow, like the beginning of a song. The sound brushed against his skin. The hairs on his arms stood on end. He held his breath. The voice was clearer now, not words, just notes, long and low, echoing through the mist, a melody without beginning or end. It wasn't human, or maybe it was something too human, too ancient, to belong to this world anymore. He took a step closer to the water, then another. The surface shivered, forming faint concentric rings that spread outward. Beneath them, he thought he saw movement, a pale shimmer, like fabric drifting just below the surface. He leaned in, and there she was, for only a heartbeat, but enough to know she was real. A woman, her form blurred by water and distance, her hair flowing around her face like strands of night. Her eyes opened beneath the lake surface, and in that instant the song grew louder, inside his head, not in the air. He staggered back, gasping. The sound filled him completely, pressing behind his eyes, pulsing in his chest. It wasn't painful. It was beautiful, unbearable in its beauty, like hearing every sorrow in the world sung at once. Then, as suddenly as it had come, it faded. The lake was still again. The mist clung close, heavy with moisture. Mikhail wiped his face and realized his hands were shaking. He looked around. No one else was there. The village lay hidden somewhere beyond the fog, distant and unreal. He tried to tell himself he had imagined it. That exhaustion had twisted his senses, but even as he thought it, the melody returned, soft, like a whisper behind his thoughts. He sat on the shore, listening. Hours passed, though he didn't notice. The fog never lifted. Once, he thought he heard footsteps behind him, but when he turned, there was only the outline of an old birch tree, its trunk half buried in moss. When he looked back toward the water, he saw something strange. Near the center of the lake, the surface was glowing faintly, not bright, not blinding, just a soft luminescence like moonlight trapped beneath glass. The glow pulsed in rhythm with the song, slow and steady. He stared, mesmerized. It looked like a heart beating beneath the water. Something in him, curiosity, longing, madness, urged him forward. He stepped into the shallows. The cold bit through his boots instantly, but he didn't stop. The glow seemed closer now, calling to him. Then a sound broke through the fog. A bell. It came from the village. The noon bell. The spell shattered. The glow vanished. The lake turned gray once more. Mikhail stumbled back to the shore, panting. He felt suddenly weak, as if the sound of that bell had drained him. He sat down on a stone and pressed his palms to his eyes. When he opened them again, he noticed something lying beside him, a small stone, smooth and oval, darker than the rest. It hadn't been there before. He picked it up, and the moment his fingers touched it, the faint hum returned, vibrating through his hand. He dropped it. The vibration stopped. He stared at the stone for a long time, before finally wrapping it in a piece of cloth and slipping it into his coat pocket. He didn't know why he kept it. He just knew it belonged to the lake. That night, he dreamt of her again. She was standing in a field of black water, surrounded by reeds that glowed faintly like embers. Her hair floated around her like a halo. When she spoke, her voice came from everywhere at once. "You heard me," she said. He tried to answer, but his voice wouldn't come. "You came when others turned away," she continued. "Now you cannot unhear what was sung." Her eyes held his. Beneath them, the water began to rise, curling around her body, lifting her higher. The moon above was full and impossibly close. "Who are you?" he whispered. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "I am what the lake remembers." Then she vanished. He woke in darkness, his room filled with the same humming silence he'd felt by the shore. His chest ached. His heartbeat matched the rhythm of the song. Outside, the fog had returned, glowing faintly beneath the moonlight. He went to the window. The lake shimmered in the distance, a ghostly mirror. For a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of movement, something white drifting across its surface. He blinked, and it was gone. But he could still feel it. The pull. The song was no longer outside of him. It lived within him now, deep and unrelenting, like a tide that would never recede. He pressed his hand against his heart and felt the faint pulse beneath his skin. It didn't beat with his rhythm anymore. It beat with hers. The days that followed passed in a blur. Mikhail no longer remembered what ordinary silence sounded like. Even when the world around him was still, he could feel it, a subtle vibration beneath the surface of things, like the faint hum of a wire strung too tight. The lake song had taken root inside him. It pulsed with his heartbeat, shaped his breathing, haunted the edges of his thoughts. He tried to go about his work, to pretend nothing had changed. The villagers spoke of the harvest, of the coming frost, of the price of grain. They didn't notice the shadows under his eyes or the way his hands trembled when the wind blew from the direction of the lake. But at night, when the lamps were out and only the moonlight crept through his window, the song grew stronger. It called to him like something half-remembered, half-promised, a voice that was no longer foreign, but familiar. One evening, as he sat by the fire, the old widow from the far end of the village came to see him. Her name was Yelena, and though her back was bent with age, her eyes were sharp as ice. She had once been the keeper of the chapel before it sank into disrepair. Without greeting, she stepped into his home and closed the door behind her. "You've heard it, haven't you?" she said. Mikhail froze. "The song," she continued, "the one beneath the lake." He hesitated before nodding. Yelena sighed and lowered herself into a chair, her fingers tracing the pattern on her shawl. "It happens every few generations," she murmured. "The lake chooses someone who listens too closely, someone who can hear what others refuse to hear." "Chooses?" he echoed. She nodded. "There is something buried in that water, older than this village, older than any of us. They say it remembers those who come near. Once it calls your name, you can never truly leave." Mikhail tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The old woman leaned forward. "Do you still dream of her?" He looked up sharply. "How do you—" "I once did too," she interrupted, her voice trembling just slightly. "When I was your age, I saw her in the fog just as you did. She asked me to follow. I nearly did." "What stopped you?" Her gaze dropped to the floor. "Someone pulled me back before it was too late. He said if I went into that water, I'd never return as myself." She reached into her coat and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. "You'll need this," she said, handing it to him. He unfolded the fabric. Inside lay a small charm made of twisted silver and bone, worn smooth by time. It was shaped like the crescent of a moon. "It's old," Yelena whispered, "older than the chapel. Wear it when you go near the lake. It won't silence her, but it may remind you of who you are." He frowned. "You think I'll go back?" She gave him a tired smile. "You already have in your mind. The rest is only a matter of time." When she left, the air in the cottage felt heavier. The charm was warm in his palm, pulsing faintly, as if echoing the heartbeat he no longer trusted. That night, he dreamt again. He was standing on the shore, the moon full above him, the lake smooth as glass. The air shimmered with faint light, and in its glow he saw her, the woman beneath the water. She was closer now, her form clearer, her eyes endless and calm. When she spoke, the sound seemed to ripple through the very fabric of the dream. "You carry a piece of me," she said. He looked down. In his hand he held the same dark stone he had found by the shore. It glowed softly, veins of pale blue light spreading through it like roots. "I don't understand," he said. "You will," she replied, "when you remember." "Remember what?" Her expression softened, almost pitying. "That you've heard this song before." The dream dissolved into mist, but her words remained. When Mikhail awoke, dawn was breaking. The fog hung low, tinted with gold. He sat up, his chest tight, and reached for his coat. The charm Yelena had given him lay on the table beside his bed, but the stone, the one he'd wrapped in cloth, was gone. He searched the floor, the drawers, even the hearth. Nothing. It had vanished as quietly as it had appeared. He stepped outside. The morning air was cold enough to sting his lungs. The village was silent except for the faint sound of the river beyond the fields. And yet, faint beneath it, he could hear the hum again. He followed it. It led him past the last of the cottages, along the narrow path that wound through birch trees and down toward the lake. The fog thickened with every step. The hum deepened into a melody, soft and hypnotic, drawing him onward. When he reached the shore, the water was utterly still. He thought for a moment that he saw movement beneath it, a flicker of light, like a reflection with no source. Then he noticed something new, faint symbols carved into the stones that lined the bank. Circles intersecting with lines, patterns repeating over and over, the same as the mark he'd seen on the moss-covered pillar days ago. He crouched to touch one. The stone was warm. As his fingers brushed the carving, the song surged inside his head, overwhelming everything else. The world tilted. He fell to his knees, clutching his temples as flashes filled his vision. A shoreline under a different sky, torches flickering, a crowd gathered in silence. He saw figures kneeling before the lake, chanting. The water glowed silver, and from it rose a shape, her shape, radiant and terrible. Then it was gone. He gasped, realizing he was lying on the ground, the taste of earth in his mouth. The fog had thinned, and in the distance he could see the faint outline of the old chapel's ruins, its roof long collapsed, its stone walls half swallowed by ivy. He stood unsteadily and began walking toward it. The chapel had been abandoned for decades, but its bones still stood against the wind. The wooden doors hung crooked, creaking softly as he pushed them open. Inside, dust floated in shafts of light like drifting snow. The smell of damp wood and stone filled the air. At the far end stood what was once an altar. Behind it, a large, cracked mural covered the wall, faded almost to nothing, but still visible. It showed the lake, and within it, a woman crowned with reeds and light. Beneath her, human figures knelt, their hands raised. The title, though half erased, could still be read, Lyra of the Waters. The name stirred something in him, a soundless memory. He reached out to touch the mural, tracing the shape of her face, and the wall beneath his fingertips felt alive, trembling faintly. The song returned, not in his head this time, but in the air around him. It was everywhere, resonating through the stone, through his bones, through the ground itself. He turned and saw her standing in the doorway, not the ghostly figure from the water, but her reflection, cast in the pale light that filtered through the mist. She was watching him, silent, her expression unreadable. "Why do you call me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Her reflection tilted its head. "Because you remember what you were." He shook his head. "I don't—" "You were the last to promise me the dawn," she said, "and when you failed, I sank." He stumbled back, his heart hammering. "That can't be true." She took a step closer. "All stories return to their beginning, Mikhail, even the ones buried beneath water." The reflection faded as the fog thickened, swallowing the room once more. The sound lingered, humming low and endless, vibrating in the hollow space where his fear used to be. When he finally stumbled out of the chapel, dusk had fallen. The first stars shimmered faintly above the tree line. He felt weightless, untethered. Somewhere in the distance the lake shimmered, waiting. He no longer felt like himself. He began walking, and though his feet carried him away from the ruins, his shadow stretched toward the water, drawn by a rhythm that had no end. The forest seemed to breathe as he walked through it. Each gust of wind carried whispers, faint but unmistakable, fragments of words, syllables that slipped between the trees and vanished before they could be understood. Mikhail moved slowly, his boots crunching on the frost-hardened leaves, the silver charm cold against his skin. He didn't know where he was going, not truly. The path twisted in ways he didn't remember, looping back on itself, rising and falling, with the rhythm of something alive. It felt as if the forest were watching him, adjusting its shape with every step. He caught glimpses of light in the corners of his vision, not lanterns, not fireflies, but the pale glow of the lake's reflection, seeping through the mist. He came upon a clearing. In its center stood an old well, its stones covered in moss and ivy. The air around it was warmer, almost breathing. He felt drawn to it, compelled by the same invisible current that had led him to the chapel. When he leaned over the rim, he saw not his reflection, but a faint shimmer, water deep and dark, moving slowly as if stirred from below. He dropped a pebble in. The sound it made was distant, delayed. Then faintly, from the depths, came a reply, a single note, low and resonant, as though the lake itself had sighed. "Mikhail." He froze. The voice came from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was neither male nor female, young nor old, a sound shaped by water and echo. "Who are you?" he whispered. A pause. Then, "You know?" He stepped back, heart pounding. "No, I don't." The well shimmered, the air around it rippling. For a moment he saw the reflection of the lake again, but this time it wasn't the lake as it was. It was brighter, filled with torches, figures standing along the shore in ceremonial robes. They chanted, voices blending into a single rising hum, and in the center of it all, bound in light, stood the woman, Lyra. Her eyes met his through the reflection. "You made the vow," she said. Mikhail shook his head. "I don't remember." "You forgot," she said softly, "but the water remembers everything." The image flickered and vanished. He staggered away, the world spinning. Every sound, every movement seemed amplified. The creak of branches, the breath of wind, the faint trickle of unseen streams. His head throbbed in rhythm with the hum that had never truly left him. By the time he reached the edge of the trees, night had fallen. The lake lay before him once again, silver beneath the moonlight. It looked peaceful, too peaceful, as though it were pretending to be still. He approached the water's edge, his reflection rippling beneath him. The charm at his neck pulsed faintly, but even that warmth felt fragile now. "I'm here," he said into the silence. "What do you want from me?" No answer came, only the sound of water lapping against the shore. Then the surface began to move. Circles spread outward, slow and deliberate. From the center, light began to rise, soft at first, then blinding. The water seemed to open, revealing a staircase of glass descending into the depths. Mikhail hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. The first step was cold as ice, but solid. The light grew brighter with every step he took, illuminating shapes in the depths, ancient ruins, fragments of statues, and stone pillars carved with symbols like those he had seen on the shore. He descended until the surface was far above him, a wavering mirror of moonlight. The air, or whatever passed for it down there, was thick, heavy, filled with faint echoes of singing. It came from everywhere at once, a choir without bodies, a sound that made his chest ache. At the bottom of the staircase, the ruins opened into a vast hall. Its ceiling was lost in shadow, but in the center stood a throne carved from coral and bone. Upon it sat Lyra. She was not a ghost now, nor a reflection. Her form was clear, radiant, human, and yet not. Her hair flowed like threads of light, and her eyes shimmered with something endless. "You came back," she said. He stepped closer, his voice trembling. "I don't understand any of this." She smiled sadly. "You will. You always do, before the end." He swallowed. "What am I?" Her gaze softened. "You are the echo, the one who once sang beside me. When the lake was young and the villages were still shadows, you stood at the altar and promised to keep the song alive. But you broke the vow. You turned away. The water fell silent, and I sank into its depths." He shook his head, memories stirring like silt in his mind. Faces, voices, torches flickering in the rain. A song, his song, weaving with hers, then breaking apart. "I tried to stop it," he whispered. "I know," she said, "but promises are stronger than memory. You may forget, but they do not." He fell to his knees. "What do you want me to do?" "Finish the song," she said simply, "so I may rest." She extended her hand. He hesitated, then took it. The moment their fingers touched, the world shifted. The hall dissolved into light, and he was standing once again on the shore, not the shore of the present, but of the past. The village was there, untouched by time. People stood in silence, torches in hand, eyes fixed on the water. Lyra stood beside him, alive, her voice rising in song. It was the same melody that had haunted him for weeks, soft, haunting, infinite. He joined in, the words spilling from his lips, though he didn't know them. The song grew, filling the air, merging with the sound of the wind, the trees, the waves. Then, abruptly, the sky darkened. A great ripple spread across the lake. The torches flickered and died. Lyra turned to him, her eyes wide with something like sorrow. "They're breaking the vow," she whispered. He turned. The villagers were fleeing, dropping their torches, running into the trees. Behind them, shadows rose from the water, faceless, immense, ancient. They reached toward the shore, their touch freezing everything it met. Lyra screamed, a sound not of fear, but defiance, and light exploded from her body. The shadows recoiled. Mikhail reached for her, but she was already fading, her light scattering like sparks on the wind. Then, silence. He gasped and opened his eyes. The hall was gone. The ruins lay silent once more. Lyra stood before him, translucent now, her glow dimming. "It was never about forgiveness," she said softly, "only remembrance. Every story must be told again, or it dies. You were chosen to remember." Tears burned his eyes. "And when I forget again?" She smiled faintly. "Then the lake will sing until you return." Her form began to dissolve, her voice fading with her. "Sleep now, Mikhail. You've carried the song long enough." The light dimmed. The ruins faded. When he awoke, he was lying on the shore, the dawn just breaking. The lake was calm, a mirror of gold and silver. The charm still hung around his neck, warm once more. He stood, staring at the water. There was no hum now, no whisper, only the sound of morning. For the first time in what felt like lifetimes, he felt still, and yet, as he turned to leave, he thought he heard, just for a moment, the faintest echo of a melody beneath the waves, a song that would never truly end. The sun rose over the water, spilling threads of pale gold across the mist. The lake, once a mirror of darkness, now shimmered with the first warmth of morning. The forest beyond it was quiet, not silent, but breathing, as though every branch and leaf was exhaling after a long-held breath. Mikhail stood at the water's edge, the charm in his hand. It no longer glowed, no longer pulsed, yet it felt alive in another way. Heavy with memory, the hum had left the air, but inside him something lingered, a stillness, a quiet music that didn't need sound to be heard. He turned, glancing back toward the path that led to the village. For a moment he wondered if it would still be there. If, when he stepped through the trees, he'd find the same houses, the same winding roads, or only ruins swallowed by moss and time. The thought didn't frighten him. It felt inevitable, like the closing of a story whose ending he had always known. The forest greeted him with soft rustling. Sunlight filtered through the branches, falling in golden shafts that painted the world anew. Each ray seemed to reveal something he hadn't noticed before. Carvings on the bark of old trees, symbols that matched those he'd seen in the ruins beneath the lake. The forest was older than he had imagined, perhaps older than the village itself. He walked for a long time. At first, there were no signs of life. The path was covered in frost and needles, his footsteps leaving faint impressions that vanished behind him. But as the sun rose higher, warmth began to return. He heard birdsong again, hesitant, as if the creatures were testing whether it was safe to sing. Then he saw smoke, thin, pale, rising between the trees. A village. Mikhail's pace quickened. When he stepped out of the woods, His breath caught. The houses stood where they always had. The roofs were patched with snow, the fences crooked and worn, but the smoke was real, curling from chimneys, scented faintly of pine. Children played near a well, their laughter light as glass bells. A woman carried a basket of firewood. A man mended a fence, humming to himself. Everything looked as it should, and yet something in their faces felt different. He approached slowly. The nearest villager, an old woman with silver hair, turned toward him. Her eyes were clouded, but kind. "You've been gone a while," she said softly. He hesitated. "You know me?" She nodded once. "Everyone who listens to the lake knows your name." The words sent a shiver through him. "How long?" he asked. "How long was I gone?" The woman smiled faintly. "Time doesn't move the same by the water. You'll learn not to ask." She turned back toward her door, leaving him standing there with more questions than he could hold. But in her tone there had been no fear, no suspicion, only familiarity, as though he had always been a part of this place and always would be. He wandered the village for hours. Some faces looked vaguely familiar, echoes of the people he'd once known, changed by years or perhaps generations. He heard fragments of song now and then, hummed by children or drifting from open windows. The melody was the same one he and Lyra had sung, but now it was softer, gentler, a lullaby rather than a lament. At the chapel, the door creaked open at his touch. Inside, dust motes danced in the beams of light. The altar was cracked, the candles melted into pools of wax, and yet someone had placed fresh flowers there. He approached, laying the charm on the stone. "It's over," he whispered. "You can rest now." A faint breeze stirred the petals. The air grew warmer, as though the chapel itself sighed in relief. Then, faintly, he heard it, the hum, not as a warning this time, but as a memory, a gentle vibration, low and calm, weaving through the stillness like a heartbeat. He closed his eyes. The sound wasn't coming from the lake anymore. It was coming from within him. For a moment the world seemed to blur. He saw flashes, Lyra's face, the glowing hall, the torches, the vow. Then all of it faded into soft light. When he opened his eyes again, the hum was gone, leaving only silence, deep, peaceful silence. He turned and left the chapel, following the path that led uphill. The forest opened before him, sunlight pouring over the valley. From that height he could see the lake, vast, calm, reflecting the sky. It no longer looked haunted, it looked alive. He stood there for a long time, letting the wind move through him, carrying away the last fragments of fear and confusion. What remained was something simpler, understanding. He finally realized that Lyra's words had not been a curse nor a command. Every story must be told again. It wasn't about him alone. It was about the lake, the people, the song itself, a cycle of remembering that gave meaning to what would otherwise be forgotten. He smiled faintly. That night, as the sun sank and the first stars appeared, the villagers gathered by the lake. A small fire burned near the shore, its glow soft and steady. Children sat in circles, and the elders began to tell stories of spirits in the water, of songs that healed sorrow, of a woman of light who once guarded the lake. Mikhail stood at the edge, listening. When one of the children looked up at him and asked, "Is it true?" he knelt beside her, the firelight flickering in his eyes. "Every story is true," he said. "You just have to listen." The girl smiled, satisfied with that answer. The storyteller's voice rose again, wrapping the night in melody. The stars reflected on the surface of the water like 1,000 tiny lanterns. The fire crackled softly. Somewhere beneath the ripples, unseen and eternal, the lake hummed, a whisper of gratitude, of memory. As the last embers dimmed, Mikhail closed his eyes and let the sound carry him into sleep. He dreamed of light and water, of voices intertwined in endless harmony. No fear, no loss, only stillness. And when dawn came again, the lake sang quietly beneath the morning wind. The road to the lake had almost disappeared beneath grass and time. It wasn't on any map anymore. Tourists passed it on trains, glimpsing a faint shimmer through the trees, a fragment of silver that might have been water or just imagination. Those who asked locals about it received only polite smiles. No one denied that the lake existed, but no one quite confirmed it either. It had become something half-remembered, half-dreamed. That was precisely what drew the traveler. She came from far away, from a city where the noise never stopped, where sleep came in fragments and silence was a thing you paid for. The lake, she'd read in a forgotten travel book, was a place of stillness, a place where people once came to hear themselves again. So she came with a single suitcase, a notebook, and a hope she didn't dare name. The house she rented was old, its wooden walls warped by damp air, its windows clouded with age. But it faced the water, and the water. It looked alive. The first evening, as the sun went down, she sat on the porch and listened. No cars, no phones, no voices. Only the wind in the reeds and a slow, steady rhythm beneath it, like breathing. She thought it might be the waves, until she realized the lake was completely still. That night, she slept better than she had in months. The second night, she dreamed. She stood on the shore, barefoot, her reflection pale and uncertain. The lake was black glass under a violet sky. A faint ripple appeared at the center, spreading outward in perfect circles. From somewhere deep below she heard a sound, low, resonant, like a single note played on an unseen instrument. Then a man's voice whispered her name, except it wasn't her name. It was another, older one, yet when she heard it, something in her chest ached with recognition. She woke before dawn, trembling, the whisper still echoing in her ears. The room was cold, but her pillow was damp, as if she had been crying. When the light finally came, she went down to the lake. The morning mist curled low across the water, veiling the world in soft gray. She knelt at the edge and touched the surface. It was warm, too warm for autumn, and beneath her reflection for just a moment she thought she saw another face looking back, a woman's face, calm, watching. She stumbled backward, her heart racing. The ripples spread, then faded. Only silence remained. Later that day, she went into the nearby village. The streets were narrow and quiet, the houses close together like they were huddling against something unseen. At the small library, a single room smelling of dust and rain, she met the librarian, an elderly man with eyes that looked as though he'd seen too much and spoken too little. "I'm looking for stories about the lake," she said. He regarded her for a moment before nodding. "Not many come asking that anymore." He disappeared into the back and returned with a thin leather-bound book. No title, no author, only the outline of a wave embossed on the cover. "Keep your voice low when you read it," he said softly. "It remembers words." She smiled uncertainly, but when she opened the book, the smile faded. The handwriting was uneven, almost trembling. The ink had bled into the pages as if water had touched them. It told of an old village long since gone, a man named Mikhail who sang to calm the storms, and a guardian of the lake, a woman bound to its depths by a promise of love and loss. The story spoke of a night when the song was silenced, and the lake went still for 100 years. The last line read, When silence becomes unbearable, the song will return through another voice. The traveler closed the book. The words pulsed in her mind, echoing like that sound she'd heard in her dream. A song returning through another voice. She left the library at sunset. The air smelled of rain. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faintest melody, so faint she couldn't tell if it came from the water or from within her own chest. That night, she lit a candle and sat by the window. The flame flickered as if breathing. The lake outside glimmered faintly, silver and black. She whispered the name she had heard in her dream, Mikhail. At once, the candle's flame bent toward the window. The sound returned, low, resonant, rising like a hum through the floorboards, through her heartbeat, through the walls. The glass vibrated, her reflection blurred and shifted. For a heartbeat, she saw someone else sitting beside her, calm, luminous, eyes deep as water, and then it was gone. She didn't sleep that night. She wrote instead, words that made no sense, words she couldn't even remember writing by morning. But when she looked at the page, they were there, a song without melody, a rhythm without measure. Yet it felt complete. Over the next few days, everything around her seemed to move in time with that rhythm, the wind, the rain, even her footsteps along the pier. Villagers watched her when she passed, not unkindly, but with the wary recognition reserved for someone who has already stepped halfway out of the world. The librarian met her again one afternoon. "You've heard it, haven't you?" he said quietly. She nodded. He sighed. "Then you must choose. To listen is to remember, and to remember is never to leave." "What does it remember?" she asked. He looked toward the water. "Everything we try to forget." That evening, she returned to the lake. The sky was bruised purple, the air heavy with mist. She stepped into the shallows. The water wrapped around her ankles like silk. She closed her eyes and listened. The hum deepened, swelling into something vast and sorrowful and beautiful. Beneath it, she heard whispers, hundreds of them, men, women, children, their voices woven together like threads of wind. They were not calling for help. They were singing, and she knew the words. She began to hum along, softly at first, then louder. The melody rose around her, wrapping her in light. The water glowed faintly, and the air shimmered. She felt weightless, suspended between memory and dream. When the song ended, she opened her eyes. The lake was still again, and in her palm lay a small silver charm shaped like a wave. She didn't remember taking it, but she knew it belonged to her. The next morning, she went to the librarian to return the book. He wasn't surprised to see the charm. "She gave it to you," he said, "the one who guards the water. It means you've been heard." "I don't understand," she said. "You don't have to," he replied. "Just keep listening." She left that afternoon, but the sound never left her. Back in the city, she would wake in the middle of the night, heart calm, breathing in rhythm with something far away. In the hum of trains, in the whisper of rain on glass, in the silence before dawn, she could still hear it, the song of the lake. Sometimes she tried to tell the story, but words failed her. People smiled politely, nodding as if humoring a dreamer. Yet those who truly listened, really listened, heard it too, faint and distant, like a heartbeat under the noise of the world. Years passed. The lake remained quiet, but not empty. It waited. And when someone new came down that forgotten road, searching for silence, the water stirred again, just slightly, just enough to let them know. It remembers. It always remembers. Years later, in a city far from that forgotten lake, the hum returned. No one noticed it at first. It was buried beneath the city's constant heartbeat, the rattle of trains, the buzz of wires, the sigh of air conditioners. But for those who listened closely, it was there, a faint vibration beneath everything, like the memory of a sound rather than the sound itself. Lena heard it first on a night when the rain refused to stop. She was an audio engineer, the kind of person who noticed the frequencies other people ignored. She spent her nights editing music for clients who didn't care about sound, only about numbers, about reach, about streams. But that night, as she layered one track over another, she noticed a resonance that wasn't supposed to be there. Low, steady, almost human. She removed all instruments, all reverb, all bass. The tone stayed, a single note pulsing at 47 hertz. It was faint, like a heartbeat underwater, and for some reason it made her feel calm. She leaned closer to the speakers. Beneath that low hum, there was something else, a breath, maybe, or a word. She turned up the gain until the signal distorted. Then she heard it, a whisper, soft and elongated, shaped like a name she didn't know. She froze. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline, and for a moment she thought she could smell the lake, wet earth, pine, something ancient. When she played the file again, the sound was gone. The next morning, she checked the recording equipment. Everything worked perfectly, no interference, no loose cables. Still, when she put on her headphones, she could feel it. A quiet vibration, steady and patient, somewhere just below hearing. It stayed with her the rest of the day, in the subway, in the office, even in silence. That evening, she decided to trace it. She loaded the original file into her workstation and ran it through a spectral analyzer. The hum appeared as a line, not noise, but a pattern. It rose and fell like waves. When she stretched it out, the pattern repeated every 32 seconds, almost like breathing, almost like a song. She ran it backward. That was when she heard it clearly, a voice whispering in an unfamiliar language, rhythm slow and deliberate. It wasn't frightening. It sounded tired, old, sad. That night, she dreamed of water, a vast expanse, dark and motionless, a faint shimmer above it, moonlight bending on glass. In the center, something moved, a figure walking slowly across the surface, leaving no ripples. The figure stopped, turned toward her, and lifted a hand. The voice returned, the same whisper she'd heard in her headphones. Listen. She woke before dawn, drenched in sweat, her room filled with the faint smell of rain and wood smoke. In the days that followed, the sound began appearing in other recordings. Not just hers, others too. A friend who worked at a radio station mentioned a strange low frequency that had been haunting their broadcasts. A musician on an online forum posted about an invisible tone that bled into every track, no matter what he did. Some called it the hum. Others called it the ghost frequency. Lena called it familiar. She started collecting the files, aligning them, layering them into a single track. When she played them together, the hum turned into harmony, faint but structured. The intervals were mathematical, almost precise, yet the pattern felt organic, alive, the lake's rhythm. As the weeks passed, her obsession grew. She stopped answering messages. Her apartment filled with wires, oscilloscopes, and notepads covered in waveforms. She spent hours watching the spectral graphs move like tides until she realized something strange. The waveform looked like a reflection, peaks and valleys mirroring each other perfectly. A reflection of what? She didn't know, but she could feel it watching her back. On the 47th day of her research, she received a letter, a real one, paper, handwritten, no return address. Inside only one sentence. It remembers you. No signature, but the ink smelled faintly of pine and smoke. She didn't tell anyone. Instead, she followed the sound. It led her underground into the tunnels beneath the old district, a labyrinth of abandoned stations and forgotten pipes. She carried her recorder, following the hum as it grew stronger with every step. The air became cooler, wetter. Water dripped from the ceiling. Somewhere far ahead, a faint light shimmered, reflected off unseen ripples. When she reached the end of the tunnel, she found it, a reservoir, sealed decades ago, hidden beneath the city. The water was perfectly still. Her recorder went silent. Then the hum began again, not through the device, but through the air itself. She stepped closer. The surface shimmered, faintly glowing in the darkness. She whispered without knowing why, "Mikhail." The water trembled, and then, for just an instant, she heard another voice answering her, layered beneath the hum. Not a ghost's, not a hallucination's. A human voice full of warmth and longing. The melody unfolded slowly, rising through the tunnels, shaking dust from the ceiling. Pipes groaned as if awakening from sleep. The sound was immense, ancient, impossible. It wasn't just around her. It was inside her. She fell to her knees, crying without understanding why. Images flooded her mind, a lake under moonlight, a woman standing in mist, a silver charm shaped like a wave. And then the voice whispered once more, "Remember." When she opened her eyes, the water was calm again, but her recorder was still running. The file showed no sound, only silence. Yet when she played it back, she could hear it faintly. The hum, softer now, patient, waiting. Over the next months, the phenomenon spread. Journalists wrote about it. Scientists tried to explain it. A new branch of acoustic research was born, focused on what they called environmental resonance anomalies. But Lena knew better. It wasn't an anomaly. It was memory. Everywhere water existed, in rivers, in puddles, in fog, the hum appeared. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't electrical. It was something older, something that connected breath to current, voice to wave. People began recording their own versions. Some found comfort. Others found fear. One day, Lena walked to the edge of the river that cut through the city. She stood there at sunset, eyes half closed, listening. The air shimmered. The hum was everywhere now, in traffic, in footsteps, in her heartbeat. She took the silver charm from her pocket, the one she didn't remember finding, and held it over the water. "I hear you," she whispered. The wind shifted. The hum changed pitch, rising like a sigh of relief. The river glowed faintly, a silver line stretching toward the horizon, and then the sound stopped. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, dense, alive. For the first time in years, she felt stillness, deep and unbroken. She left the city that night. No one saw where she went, but sometimes, in recordings made near the river, a faint melody can still be heard, a woman's voice humming a wordless song woven into the current. Some say it's an echo. Some say it's interference. Others say the lake found its way back to her. Whatever the truth, the hum remains. It lives in headphones, in oceans, in rain. It waits in every silence, patient and ancient, whispering to those who listen closely enough. The lake remembers. And so do you. It began with the rivers. All over the world, strange recordings appeared, faint tones beneath the surface of every current, captured by researchers, hikers, fishermen. Some dismissed them as interference, others as natural resonance. But soon they realized the frequencies matched. 47 hertz, always 47. In Iceland, a group of geologists placed sensors in glacial meltwater and found the same hum rising through the ice. In Japan, A sound engineer caught it while testing underwater microphones in a temple pond. In every place where water touched earth, the same note lingered, low, calm, patient. And people began to talk. A scientist from Prague published a paper calling it a planetary heartbeat. A journalist named it the song beneath the world. But among online forums and midnight conversations, another theory spread, that it wasn't a sound from the earth, but of memory itself. The old legends resurfaced, tales of lakes that sang, wells that whispered secrets, rivers that remembered names. Some traced it to Siberian myths of souls trapped beneath the ice, others to Celtic stories of water spirits waiting for voices to return. And somewhere between folklore and data, between myth and measurement, the hum kept spreading. No one could record it properly. Every microphone captured only part of it, as though the sound were shy. But people began to feel it. In meditation rooms, in subway tunnels, in the silence between songs, they sensed a vibration deep inside the bones, a warmth, a kind of remembering. It wasn't haunting. It was familiar. For some, it came in dreams. A sailor on the Baltic Sea dreamed of a woman standing on the surface of the water, her hair flowing like tide foam. When he woke, his ship's instruments were all tuned to the same frequency. A girl in Morocco heard the hum in her sleep, and when she woke, her tears tasted like salt water, though she had never seen the ocean. In India, monks began chanting at the same tone without ever having heard it consciously. They said it aligned with the breath of the planet. Soon, sound artists started composing around it. An entire genre of music appeared. Ambient, they called it. Soft drones, slow waves, voices hidden beneath layers of reverb. Listeners described the same effect. Peace, nostalgia, a strange tenderness. Some cried without knowing why. Others said they finally dreamed again after years of insomnia. Then the messages began. At first, they appeared in the recordings, faint whispers hidden beneath the tone. When isolated, the voices spoke in dozens of languages, most ancient or extinct. Linguists tried to decode them, but found they all carried a single meaning. We remember. It became a phenomenon. News outlets called it the auditory awakening. Religions debated its origin. Scientists denied it, then began to dream too. In one of those dreams, an astrophysicist from Chile saw the Earth surrounded by invisible waves, each pulse resonating through oceans, clouds, and the human nervous system itself. When he woke, he discovered something extraordinary. Every time the hum intensified globally, small fluctuations appeared in the planet's magnetic field, as if the Earth was literally singing back. Meanwhile, in a quiet apartment in Warsaw, Lena, older now, her hair streaked with gray, sat by her window, listening to the rain. She had lived years without speaking of what she'd found, but she could feel it now more clearly than ever, not just in the recordings, but in her pulse, her breath. The lake had outgrown its boundaries. It had become the world. She opened her old recorder, the same one from years ago, and pressed record. Nothing but rain. Then softly, beneath the static, a melody formed. Not the hum this time. A song. The voice was human, fragile, beautiful. The same tone she remembered from the tunnels, but clearer. It carried words she didn't recognize, but somehow understood. A call, an answer, a promise. Tears streamed down her face. She whispered to the recorder, "I hear you." And then the voice answered, "We hear you too." That night, cities went quiet. Across continents, power grids flickered, not from malfunction, but from synchronicity. Instruments tuned themselves to the hum. Oceans shimmered faintly in moonlight, as though phosphorescent plankton had bloomed everywhere at once. The planet seemed to breathe. Children woke from dreams speaking names they'd never heard. Writers began filling pages with phrases they didn't remember writing. Painters created images of lakes, waves, silver charms, hands rising from water. It was as if the myth itself had decided to retell its story through everyone at once. The world did not panic. It simply listened. For the first time in history, silence felt sacred again. People turned off their devices, stood near rivers, seas, or rain-soaked streets, and just breathed, listening to the resonance beneath everything. The sound was no longer a mystery to solve, but a memory to share. And deep beneath all those layers of human attention, the water stirred. If one could travel far enough below the surface, deeper than light, deeper than sound, they would find not darkness, but warmth. There, ancient forms of energy drifted like thought, and among them a single heartbeat pulsed steadily. Somewhere in that endless depth, the figure of Mikhail stood again, no longer human, not entirely spirit, but something between. The guardian who had once drowned and once returned, now part of the current itself. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Every ripple that touched the shore was his voice. Every whisper in sleep was his breath. And somewhere above, Lena dreamed again, her final dream. In it, she stood by the lake as it had been in the beginning. Moonlight painted the surface silver. The air smelled of pine and eternity. Across the water, the woman of light waited. "You came back," Lena said. The woman smiled. "You never left. None of us do. We return through memory." The lake glowed brighter until the two of them were silhouettes surrounded by endless water and stars. Then came the hum, no longer low, no longer hidden, but vast, rising through sky and earth and space. It was the sound of connection, of everything remembering itself. When Lena woke, the world was silent again, but the silence was full, complete. She wrote a single sentence in her journal before closing it for the last time. The story never ends. It only changes who tells it. Some say she vanished that night, walking into the river without a trace. Others claim she still writes, her words appearing in the static between radio stations, in the breath before rain, and somewhere, when the world is quiet enough, the hum still lingers, soft, eternal, familiar. The lake remembers, and now the world does too. The world held its breath. The hum had not disappeared. It had simply settled into the corners of existence where people had stopped noticing, woven into the spaces between thought and dream. Cities that once ignored rivers and lakes now paused in subtle ways. Footsteps slowed along bridges, windows opened for no reason but to hear the wind carry the faint vibration through the streets, and street musicians unconsciously began to play in perfect harmony with it. Time, as humans measured it, continued to flow, but the hum existed outside it. It had no beginning and no end, only continuations, spiraling through generations. It was in the rain dripping from the leaves in Kyoto, in the ice cracking silently under Arctic skies, in the slow erosion of sandstone cliffs in the Sahara. Wherever water touched stone, wherever moisture touched air, it lingered, a reminder that the planet itself remembered. Lena's journal had survived decades, hidden in an attic in Warsaw. Its leather cover was cracked, pages yellowed and brittle, but the words carried life beyond the ink, stories of lakes that sang, rivers that remembered names, and a world that had once listened and would listen again. One rainy afternoon, a girl named Amara found it by accident. She had never known Lena, never known the old lakes, the stories, or the hum. She was ordinary in every measurable way, Yet the moment her fingers brushed the pages, something shifted in her chest. A faint vibration began there, soft, patient, almost shy. Her heart synchronized with it, then her breath, then her entire being. It was as if the story was not merely on the page, but inside her, awakening threads she did not know existed. She read, her eyes skipping lines that seemed too vast, too layered to comprehend in one glance. And then she paused, feeling the first wave of recognition. This hum, this resonance, was calling her. It wanted her to follow. She left her apartment the moment rain stopped, moving instinctively toward water. The world around her seemed subtly altered. Leaves glistened with dew that shone unnaturally bright. Puddles reflected not just the sky, but faint echoes of other places, other times. The hum, now more defined, threaded through her every step. It led her across bridges, through empty streets, along riverbanks she had never noticed. Sometimes it disappeared completely, only to return with startling clarity, as if to remind her that listening required patience, not urgency. By nightfall, she arrived at a quiet river that wound through a forgotten part of the city. Its surface was smooth, almost unreal in the moonlight. Amara knelt and dipped her hand into the water, feeling the faint pulse that ran beneath the world. It was not only Lena's story anymore, nor Mikhail's presence. It was the memory of every human who had listened, every child who had dreamed, every scientist who had measured frequencies and found meaning beyond explanation. And then she saw him, not in the literal sense, but in the shimmer of movement beneath the water, a figure forming and unforming with the currents. Mikhail, once human, once spirit, now the living embodiment of the river's memory. He did not speak, he did not gesture, yet every ripple across the water carried the weight of his presence. Every vibration through the air echoed his acknowledgement. "We have been waiting for you." Amara closed her eyes. The world fell away. She could see the threads of connection, the invisible pulses between mountains and oceans, between living beings and the rocks they walked upon, between memory itself and the passing of time. The hum was everywhere now, not shy, not hidden, but fully revealed. It spoke in ancient tongues she could understand without knowing the language, in frequencies she felt in her bones and blood. It spoke of remembering. It spoke of return. It spoke of responsibility. Hours passed, or perhaps only moments, for time now bent and swirled around her. Amara began to dream with open eyes. She saw the beginning of the lakes, the rivers, the first hum that rose from beneath the ice in Iceland, the temple ponds in Japan, the Baltic waves, the salt flats of Morocco, the chanting monks in India. She saw Lena, as a young woman, placing a recorder into the tunnels, capturing what the world could not yet hear. She saw Mikhail rising, falling, becoming one with the current, shaping and reshaping it, waiting for those who could finally listen. And then she realized the hum had never been a mystery to solve. It had been an invitation. It had been memory itself, seeking expression, seeking witnesses, seeking those who could carry it forward. She felt the weight of the generations before her, the ones who had walked near lakes, slept near rivers, dreamed under the stars, and she understood that she was not alone. Every pulse in her body matched a pulse in the earth. Every breath she took resonated with the slow, infinite rhythm of memory returning. The river stirred. Tiny bioluminescent organisms glowed faintly beneath the surface, each one blinking in perfect synchronization with the hum. The sound rose, now layered, complex, alive. It carried voices, human and not human, young and old, known and unknown. They sang in unison, "We remember, we return, we continue." Amara felt tears on her face, though she could not tell if they were hers or the river's. She knelt deeper, immersing her hands fully into the current. Mikhail's presence enveloped her, not as a form, but as a force of consciousness, a memory made tangible, a song made real. And in that moment, the story became her own. She could hear Lena whispering through her mind, Mikhail's pulse resonating in her bones, the planet breathing in harmony with all that had ever existed. For the first time, humanity understood what it meant to truly listen, not to interpret, not to measure, not to control, but to feel, to remember, to become part of something greater than itself. Across the world, children began waking from dreams, murmuring words that had not yet been spoken. Writers discovered sentences they did not consciously write. Painters captured lakes, glowing in moonlight, hands rising from water, figures half visible, half memory. The planet itself seemed to hold its breath, allowing every human, every creature, every stone and river to feel the resonance within. Amara remained at the river long after dawn. The hum continued, vast and patient. She knew that she would not be the last to hear it, nor the first, but she was now a part of the chain. One day she might pass it to another, and the story would continue, because the story never ends. It flows like the water, it breathes like the wind, it sings like the earth itself. And far beneath the waves, Mikhail pulsed steadily, a heartbeat carried into eternity. Lena's journal closed in an attic, yet its words reached outward, threading through the world. The rivers, the lakes, the oceans, the rain, the streams, the wells. Each carried a fragment, a memory, a note, a whisper. And somewhere, waiting to be found, someone would kneel, feel it, listen, and say simply, "I hear you." And the earth answered, in every language, every vibration, every drop of water, "We hear you too. We have always been here. We will always be here. We remember." The lake remembered, the rivers remembered, the oceans remembered, and now the world remembered, and so it always would.